Okay, you guys, ready for the last one? I sure am. I'm tired. Anyways, okay. So, in this lecture, we're going to talk about perceiving faces because the last one we talked about perceiving objects and now it's faces because, and it's going to be a bit longer, I think. But it's fun, I hope. So, the previous lecture discussed how objects are recognized effortlessly despite the computational challenges involved. This is even more impressive in the case of faces, which are recognized very easily and provide a large amount of socially important information. So, part 1, holistic perception of faces. So, researchers argue that faces are recognized in a different way to other objects. In particular, face identity normally depends on the configuration of and subtle differences between features present in all faces, like eyes, nose, mouth, etc., rather than detecting unique features. This idea of perceiving features as a whole is demonstrated by a number of experimental observations about face perception. So, before that, what it means is that so we all have like the same features, like we all have eyes, nose, mouth. So, um, so instead of detecting unique features, like that person suddenly has a third eye, we look at them as a whole. And you know, so that's what makes it different than recognizing objects. So, recognizing a face involves subtle distinctions between items containing the same features, unlike most object recognition problems. So, they made some experimental observations about face perception. So, number one, face inversion effect. So, face recognition becomes much more difficult when faces are turned upside down, a problem which is much less pronounced in other objects, Yin 1969. The stature illusion, so this is like very popular. I originally wanted to put this illusion in, but I don't want you to stare at that for like 20 minutes. So have this friendly picture instead. I also put the link of this where you can find the whole thing in the description. So please check that out. So the stature illusion also demonstrates that inverted faces are responded to differently. So Um, basically, it's saying that response to the inverted face is different than inverted objects. It's like it's disproportionately affected or something. So and then the second one, the part hole effect describes the fact that participants are less able to recognize isolated face parts than when they are integrated into a face. Which means recognition is better in context of whole face. So what they did was like they separated the eyes, the nose, and the mouth of several different people's faces, and then they tried to like mash them all together. Like, let's say you take the eyes of Jennifer Aniston, and then the nose of Jennifer Lawrence, and then the mouth of Jennifer Garner. That's a lot of Jennifers. Would you still be able to recognize the person? So that's basically it. And what they're saying is that um, if it's only like one part of the face and you can't really recognize it, it's better when it's like a whole part. Okay, so the third one is the composite effect. Two halves of different faces also interfere with each other when aligned, showing that they are automatically bound together. Young et al. 1987. So what this is that even if it's different halves, you still see it as one face. This one they mash two faces together, but you can still see it as like a normal face. You know, a few years back, I think it's almost a decade ago, there was this big thing where in K-pop where they mash where they kind of composite the faces of like members in a K-pop group and then see like what is the average face, of that group, stuff like that. So in the experimental data, faces are disproportionately affected by inversion. Face parts are recognized more easily when in a face context. The fusing of two halves of a face into a composite happens automatically and disrupts recognition. So these findings support the conclusion that face processing is holistic or configural. Yeah. So go to the second part. Oh yeah, the last part is basically like that part was basically like how do you know if it's a face is if you invert it, it's harder to recognize. And if you isolate the face parts, it's harder to recognize. And then if you fuse two halves of a face, it still looks like a face, but you can't really recognize that easy. So second part is cognitive models of face processing. So in this one, we're going to talk about how a computer can um, recognize a face, I guess. So Bruce and Young, 1986, presented an influential model of face recognition, which describes a series of steps observers must go through in order to recall a name and other information based on a face. The model assumes that we encode the structure of the face and use this information in two routes. In one route, the current view-centered image of the face is analyzed in order to recognize facial expression or support speech analysis. In the other route, a general view-independent description is compared to previously seen faces that are represented as face recognition unit. If one of these units is strongly activated, the face seems familiar and a corresponding person identity note fires. This note stores information about the person, such as occupation, with their name being stored separately in a name generator. Although rather abstract, this model accounts for the experience of knowing someone's face but being unable to recall his or her name. In experiments, participants are faster to make decisions about occupation than name, and better still at distinguishing unfamiliar and familiar faces. So it's basically saying like when you recognize a face, you kind of search your database for like a person identity. So um what you stick like you kind of stick a label to that person. So for example, you know this person is a cashier, so you're more likely to identify the person as a cashier rather than their name first. So there's the whole model about it from Bruce and Young. You can go search for it. It's fun. And it's easier to understand if you have a computer science background, I guess, but it's really just a simple node network. Um, it sounds but it's really just like if you can put it all together, it's not that hard to recognize. So the model like this model by Bruce and Young was extended by Burton and colleagues in two main ways. First, they stimulated the units in an interactive activation and competitions (IAC) connectionist network where learned association could be represented by spreading activation. Burton, Bruce, and Johnston, 1990. Moreover, this can explain semantic priming effects, where participants are quicker to recognize faces that have been primed by the face or name of a related person. So if you see someone's face as familiar to someone, you're quicker to recall that person. Yeah. So activate so oh, this person looks like Jennifer Lawrence. Sorry, I don't know who. I'm stuck on Jennifer's, whatever. So then you'll be like more likely to remember that person. So activating semantic information feeds back into the network of everyone who shares that information, and these nodes are easier to activate next time. So second, Schweinberger and Burton in 2003 proposed an emotional or affective road whereby familiar faces trigger feelings even when not recognized. So basically, Burton, Bruce, and Johnston's model try to explain how to retrieve name based on focused semantic info. Yeah. Okay. That's basically it. So now we go to part 3. Prosopagnosia. So in the last lecture, we learned about patients with an object recognition problem, agnosia. In rare cases, patients are diagnosed with a problem specific to recognizing faces, known as prosopagnosia. Prosopagnosia can occur from a stroke and other localized brain damage, and developmental form has also been reported. So unlike agnosia, where it's not really a developmental disorder, it usually happens after brain damage. Prosopagnosia can probably be a developmental disorder, like you kind of get it from as you grow up. And it's also something that's like, if it's gone for good, like um, so far from what they know. Uh, like you can't recognize the face, but you can still recognize the person based on other stuff. Like your brain can be plastic about it. Like you learn to adapt with what you've got, or with what you don't have. So prosopagnostics can normally detect faces. They know where they are, but they just fail to recognize friends, loved ones, and famous faces. As with other instances of brain damage, patients often have other visual problems. However, some patients have been reported who can recognize objects normally and feel specifically at faces. This is key evidence that face perception uses specialized systems in the brain. It has been suggested that prosopagnostics do not process faces holistically in the same way as normal participants, and so treat normal and inverted faces equally poorly. So it doesn't, like, the whole face inversion thing, they don't really do good at it. Like, if we can, like, normal people can recognize face um uninverted, like the normal way, easily, but if it's inverted we can't. But a prosopagnostics, it doesn't matter if it's inverted or not, they're going to perform equally poor. um Despite their inability to recognize faces by naming them overtly, it has been reported that some prosopagnostics show covert recognition. They respond differently to familiar faces even though they can't name them. In particular, they may show semantic priming by responding faster to faces and names that are associated. So they also show um, a galvanic skin response to familiar faces. Tranel and Damasio, 1985. This is one piece of evidence for the Schweinberger and Burton model, in that prosopagnosia may result from damage to the semantic root while leaving the emotional root intact. So it has been proposed that patients with Capgras delusion show the opposite impairment. So in Capgras delusion, a delusional misidentification disorder, the patient claims that family members or friends have been replaced by an imposter. So these patients recognize faces but may show an abnormal galvanic skin response. Therefore, the disorder may arise from a problem with the emotional route, meaning that faces are not associated with gender arousal. So, in the last part, Schweinberger and Burton did say that, um, like, they're basically saying like how you recognize faces in other routes. So this one in Schweinberger and Burton, they say it's familiar faces trigger feelings. So for prosopagnostics that cannot recognize faces, they even if they can't recognize it, when they see that face, they can still kind of feel stuff. Like, um, yeah, I think it's kind of how they adapt. Like, they can still pick up on other things like voices for sure. And then you have Capgras delusion, where it's like the opposite. They can still recognize faces, but they kind of don't believe that person is that person. Like, I know that person looks like my dad, but he's not my dad. Like, I don't know this person, stuff like that. So, Capgras delusion, face recognition is intact, but they have abnormal emotional attachment to a person and reduced skin conductance response. Basically, the face doesn't feel familiar, and they have problem with the emotional or affective route. But with prosopagnosia, while face recognition is impaired, covert recognition and skin conductance is present. So face feels familiar. So there are emotional roots intact. So there's a double dissociation, where one group does well in test A but not B, while the other do good in B but not A. So I think that kind of verifies something. Anyway, so we move on to the last part where we talk about our faces special. So in this one, we're going to talk about the FFA. So I think there was one, what I think doubles, is it James Bond? I'm not sure. The one with Daniel Craig. I'm not really up to my action movies knowledge, so I'm not sure. So like the villain was trying to this is something that the my lecture showed in the lecture. So this is a clip from the movie where the villain tries to drill into Jason Bourne. No, I don't think so. Uh, to the hero's brain to take out the um specific part of the brain that uh, set to recognize faces. So that's what we're going to talk about. So the evidence so far suggests that faces are processed in a special way, holistically, that is different from other objects. Considerable evidence from neuroscience has also emerged, showing that there are specialist areas of the brain which are particularly sensitive to faces, in particular the fusiform gyrus, a small region within visual cortex that has been dubbed the fusiform face area, which will be known FFA. Ken Wisher and colleagues have shown in several fMRI experiments that this region responds more strongly to faces than most other objects. Um, yeah, as we have seen, this could be because faces are distinguished by configurations of similar features. However, Yovel and Ken Wisher found that FFA responded more strongly to faces than control objects that differed in the same way. The damage in prosopagnosia, though variable, often includes the FFA. An alternative hypothesis is that the behavioral and the neuroscience evidence may reflect our particular expertise with faces. By this account, as we become experts at making subtle distinctions between the individual members of a category, we gradually show holistic processing and recruit brain regions such as the FFA. Most people are experts with faces, but the same findings could happen with other classes of objects. There is support for this claim from several sources. Some prosopagnostics can still recognize categories at which they are expert. However, there are rare cases of people who become agnostic for specific categories, such as farmer losing his ability to recognize cows. Activation in the FFA has also been observed for people with particular expertise, such as car experts and bird watchers. So, um, a side note, right hemisphere is also argued to be more involved in face recognition. I don't have a citation for that though. So basically the story is this. They're trying to find the specific part of the brain that do recognize face recognition. So they think it's the fusiform gyrus or the FFA. Because in fMRIs, this region is like the one that lights up the most. So they think, and usually people who has prosopagnosia, they have damage around that area too, and like FFA is always involved. Um, but and like they think this is the thing. This is it, you guys. Like this is the one we use to recognize faces. But then there's also experiments that says that not really. It's just it affects like um how do you say like it's reflect like particular expertise with faces. Like it's more expertise like this person who was a farmer, like he can't recognize his cows, but I think he can recognize people. Not sure how. I think there was this sheep person. Hmm. Sorry, I think it's too late. It's already like 4 a.m. I can barely talk without sounding like a drunk person, and I have never drunk a drop of alcohol in my life. Anyways, okay. Oh my god. Oh my god. Keep it together. So there's this experiment they did. Like this is a sheep farmer, and he has prosopagnosia, I think. So he can't recognize people's faces, but he can recognize sheep faces very well. Like, yeah. So, like, sheep is a living being, right? It's not an object. It has faces. So his FFA is still very much intact. he can't recognize human faces, but he can recognize sheep faces because there he's like an expert in those, right? Okay, they did something with things called greebles because like they want people to kind of be an expert at greebles. So greebles are just like the some 3D figures that they made and like um it's I don't know. To me, it's kind of creepy, but others just kind of weird, wonky stuff like that. Anyways, so some researchers have argued that in order to study expertise properly, participants must learn to recognize objects, which like faces, depend on distinguishing between feature configurations. In several studies, Tar and colleagues have done this by training observers on sets of greebles, a computer-generated object which are organized into families, genders, and individuals. So you can read it, Gauthier and Tar, 1987 did this. So you can probably search that in Google Scholar or something. After training for 7 to 10 hours, Dribble experts, yeah, you don't need much training to be experts, show some of the hallmarks of holistic processing such as the composite effect and the sensitivity to inversion. Moreover, the FFA may be involved when these participants recognize scribbles, suggesting that it is more flexible than has been proposed. Yeah, so we still don't know what the FFA really does, you guys. The debate is still going on. So I don't think they'll solve that anytime soon. So that's about that. So that's it. That's it, you guys. I'm done. I'm so sleepy. I'm gonna stop now.